Joining us to discuss the situation in the war-torn country is Michael Druckman, Director of Programs, Ukraine International Republican Institute. Good afternoon and welcome to TVP World.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
So now we've learned on Friday that Ukrainian civilians from the Kharkiv region, this is from the city of Vovchansk and surrounding areas, are being evacuated because the Russian forces are intensely shelling the area. So why are the Russians focusing on this particular terrain now?
Well, I think this is something that has been expected now for quite some time. The Ukrainian military and government have been signaling that Russia is preparing for one last chance with a spring-summer offensive. Kharkiv, of course, holds extreme significance, not just in Ukraine, but the former Soviet Union, as, again, a city of real significance. It's a city that is currently, up until this recent offensive has started, one of the most, let's say, dynamic, most educated cities in the country, a real tech hub within Ukraine, and the second largest city with a thriving economy prior to Russia's full-scale invasion. So much significance placed on the city, and a city that has been shelled ruthlessly every day since the beginning of this full-scale invasion, and really just showing extreme resilience in the face of this that the city endures. Of course, much risk for the surrounding regions, but again, this is something that has been signaled both by the Russians and communicated by the Ukrainian government to begin preparing for Russia to make another attempt.
Right. The city of Kharkiv itself is a very well-defended city. Based on the Russians', well, let's say, total defeat in Kharkiv, just a couple months after the full-scale invasion, is it really likely that they would make an offensive on Ukraine's second largest city, which also has, like I said, very, very tough defenses surrounding it?
Well, we don't know what's in the minds of those calling the shots in the Kremlin on where and when to strike. Again, if you were to look at IRI's public opinion data going back before the full-scale invasion, it's a shame that the Kremlin didn't have access to more information on Ukrainian public opinion, and that each foot of ground within Ukraine would be defended. So I have no doubt that not just the residents there, but Ukraine's military forces, hardened after 2 years of the full-scale invasion and 10 years of fighting off a Russian invasion, will meet this new threat. And those that will come until Ukrainians achieve the victory that we know that the majority of them want to see, including the return of all of their territory, not just these small grabs that Russia is trying to make today outside of Kharkiv.
Now, since you've mentioned this return of the Ukrainian territory that is now under Russian control, we know that in June, Switzerland is to host a peace conference, which is to focus around President Zelensky's 10-point peace formula, which, of course, one of them is the returning of these lands that have been, well, taken over by the Russians. What do you think this conference might bring?
Well, I certainly hope it brings renewed attention to these points, and that we keep, in focus not what we in the Western community or from our own countries think the resolution of this war should be, but what do Ukrainians feel the resolution of the war should look like. And that is the return of all of their territory that was taken starting in 2014 with the illegal occupation and supposed annexation by the Russian Federation. So I think that the very least convening these countries together to return the focus onto what does Ukraine want, what do Ukrainian people want to see. Again, so much blood, so many people's lives completely upended. And again, this is happening within Europe. And I know countries where we're sitting and in the region are looking at this closely. So the precedent that is being set here in terms of how this conflict is resolved is absolutely critical. And there's one country that today could end this war, and that is the Russian Federation. They could end this today. They could withdraw their troops, and this could all be over. So really, the question of who bears responsibility is absolutely clear. But in terms of what will come out of this conference, again, it's still early days as we're seeing today. Every day is a week in Ukraine. Every week is a month. So much can happen between now and that time.
Right. Concerning that peace program plan, the 10-point peace plan that President Zelensky has put forward several times now to different countries around the world, That's the Ukrainian view of how this war should end. Of course, as was mentioned, Russia taking full responsibility for the invasion and all the deaths in Ukraine, the regaining of territory, but also the facing of or the accountability of high-level military authorities and those in the regime by International Criminal Court and what have you. If you compare their version, the Ukrainian version, with the Russian version, they seem like miles and miles and miles apart. Therefore, is there any plan that can be brought together and aligned in order to at least have the two sit down and have talks?
I think that's, again, a very difficult question to answer when you look at this, and particularly look at Ukrainian public opinion on where they fall on some of these issues, where you do have very hard feelings and set opinion on what, again, this peace plan should look like in implementation and what they want to see. But again, so much can happen between now and this summer. So much will happen between now and the next few days even. And so the fact that Ukraine is putting forward again that it's willing to talk to partners, again, I think very important that it's engaging the Western Alliance, the transatlantic community, and Southeast Asian neighbors, Asian democracies that are now playing a much larger role in the region, again, keeping an eye on their own neighborhood. Ukraine's showing very strong initiative, at least in this area, of getting people talking and centering them and focusing the international community on what's at stake and what are some of the options that Ukraine is looking to pursue.
And on that same subject, what about the Chinese peace plan that has been proposed that would treat both Russia and Ukraine as equals? Does that have any way of gaining any traction?
Certainly not with the Ukrainian people. We know that there's been a number of diplomatic maneuvers in the last few weeks in this area. I think for the Ukrainian government, over the last year, there's become a real understanding of who's playing a positive role in trying to resolve the war, support Ukraine, and who's playing a negative role in helping to ensure that the Russian war machine continues to function and kill more Ukrainians.
So now, since we've been talking also about this offensive, I mean, French President Emmanuel Macron has said that if Russia broke through Ukrainian front lines and Kyiv would make such a request, he would send troops to Ukraine. Of course, after that, we heard statements from Russia saying that if that were to happen, French troops would become targets, but also that Russia would respond with nuclear weapons. Just how serious do you think they are about this threat, and should we take it seriously that they would indeed respond with nuclear weapons?
Well, I think again, the response that we heard is that very indicative of that this strategic ambiguity and more of these statements are actually quite effective, and that the Kremlin's listening very closely to what our allies are talking about. But when we look at the response from the Russian Federation from the sinking of the Moskva in the Black Sea in April of 2022 through to the liberation of Kharkiv region, Kherson, we've seen none of the responses that have been so hysterically channeled from the Kremlin materialize. So I think continued strategic ambiguity in this direction and showing real strength of Ukraine's allies to support Ukraine in Ukraine's defensive war is only a good thing.
Right. All right. Well, thank you very much, Michael Druckman, Director of Programs Ukraine from the International Republican Institute. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you.